Welcome back to a new episode of Questions for the Rector. I'm your host, Father Nicolas Desposito. With me, we have Bishop Daniel Sandborn, the rector of Most Holy Trinity Seminary. Hello, Your Excellency.
Hello.
Recently, Bishop Schneider was interviewed by Catholic Family News about a book that he has written, Flee from Heresy. And in the same interview, he also touches upon the issue of Archbishop Viganò. But let's comment, Your Excellency, first about Flee from Heresy, his book. We haven't read the book, but in the interview, Bishop Schneider seems to have an error, that is a distinction between crime and sin as both requiring an admonition in order for the crime or the sin to be present. Is that correct, Your Excellency?
No, that's incorrect. No, there is a sin of heresy, which can be formal or material. Formal means that you know that the ideas that you have are contrary to the teaching of the Church. Material means that you have thought or said something which is contrary to the teaching of the Church, but which you don't realize that it is contrary to the teaching of the Church. So, for example, an ignorant person might say something that is contrary to the teaching of the Church, but not realize that it's heresy. Many people think that the Immaculate Conception pertains to our Lord's conception and not Our Lady's conception. That would be a material heresy. They just don't know. They never learned it in their catechism. That's a material heresy. Formal means that you know that it's contrary to the teaching of the Church. And this occurs in people who are well educated, such as Martin Luther and other heretics in the history of the Church. They certainly knew that they were teaching against the magisterium of the Catholic Church. So that is the sin. Then there is the crime, which requires that you be accused and that your formality, that is your pertinacious attitude against the teaching of the Church, be proven, and then you are censured. See, so that is the crime of heresy, but that is not the sin of heresy. Just as in the case of murder, you could murder somebody, that's the sin, but it isn't. And it's also a crime, but you are not accused of the crime until it goes to court and until there is a judge and a jury and you are convicted. So in reality, you are a murderer, but you're not legally a murderer until you are convicted. It's analogous to that. So you can perform something that's wrong, do something wrong, but it doesn't become a crime until it is pursued by the law of the Church.
And in a way, Your Excellency, the position that we hold here, the thesis of Cassiciacum, avoids that issue because of this problem, right?
Yes, that's one of the reasons. We do not say that Bergoglio or the Vatican II popes in general are not popes for the reason of their personal sin of heresy or even a crime of heresy. We say that they are not popes because they intend and have intended to impose upon the Church a false religion, the Vatican II religion, which has its own rites, its own doctrines, its own disciplines, which are contrary to all of the traditional rites, doctrines, and disciplines of the Catholic Church. So that is what we call defect of intention, when after election he says, I accept. He accepts with the wrong intention, this evil intention of destroying ultimately the Catholic Church from within. That is the argument of the thesis, and Archbishop Viganò, to his credit, followed exactly that. He did not mention the thesis, but he said that Bergoglio lacks authority and he called upon the bishops to depose him. So he recognized the difference between his lack of authority, by which he is not the Pope, but also the necessity for the bishops to declare it and to make it a legal act. See, so already Bishop Schneider does not understand Archbishop Viganò, and he doesn't understand the thesis, and he's arguing, we call this in logic, ignorantia elenchi. That means ignorance of the subject. We are not talking about the personal heresy of Bergoglio or any of these other Vatican II so-called popes. We are talking about their intention to pervert the Church, and this is what is before our eyes after 60 years of Vatican II. So to make the summary of the point, we are not arguing about personal heresy here.
And also, Your Excellency, we should clarify that when we speak about intention, you can address the issue of the subjective intention, but also of the objective intention, which regards the actual object or the thing being done. And that's what we emphasize, right?
Yes, somebody could do something evil, very evil, with a good intention. You see, somebody might think euthanasia is a good thing because it will put the person out of his or her misery. It's conceivable that somebody could have a good intention that way, but the object of his act is murder. You see, so we're not even getting into whether these Paul VI and John Paul II and Bergoglio have good intentions or not, good subjective intentions. The modernists liked to praise themselves by saying we are bringing the church out of the Middle Ages into the modern era, and that will save the church. If you read their literature from the time of Pius X, when they were suppressed, this is what they were saying, that the church will never survive in its medieval character. And so, in some strange way, they may have had a good intention. We are not discussing that at all. How do you know what the intentions of a person are subjectively? It is the objective intention. Somebody might be insane and think, for example, a pilot crashing a plane because he had a fight with his girlfriend. He might be insane enough to think this is a good idea, but the objective intention is evil. You see, and that of course occurred a number of years ago. So you're looking at objective intention, and the objective intention that is evil is incompatible with the authority that comes from Christ to rule the faithful.
And at one point of the interview, Your Excellency, Bishop Schneider recognizes that the doctrinal confusion actually today comes from the person he calls the Pope, from Bergoglio, which means he is recognizing this evil objective intention.
Yes. Where did the doctrinal confusion come from? I was born in 1950. I grew up under Pius XII, and in later youth under John the 23rd. All right. Up to that time, there was no doctrinal confusion in the Catholic Church. Everyone believed the same thing. Everyone professed the same faith. There were no liberals or conservatives. Nothing. Everything was the same. Where does it come from? It came from Vatican II. I lived through it. I remember it. I saw it little by little. The ideas that were downright heretical invading people's minds as a result of this horrid council. That's where it came from. And who's responsible for this? Is it the people in the pews? Did they want this? Did they cry out for a modernist change in the Catholic Church? Modernist liturgy, etc.? Ecumenism? Did they call out for that? No. It came from this corrupt hierarchy which had this intention to alter the church according to the very ideas of the modernists. So if there's confusion, doctrinal confusion, again, that emphasizes and confirms what Viganò is saying, that these people, since Vatican II, have had this idea of perverting the church, and that is incompatible with the authority of Christ. He is invested with the authority of Christ. So if you say that that man is the Pope, then you are saying that Christ himself intends to pervert the church because he operates with the authority of Christ, not really his own authority. The authority of Christ is what he has in order to rule the church. He is the vicar of Christ. He is not Christ himself. So you would have to apply to Christ all of the perversion and turmoil and confusion that we have seen since Vatican II. St. Paul said the Catholic Church is the pillar and ground of truth. And can we say that about this since Vatican II? Can we say that? Where is the pillar and ground of truth found? It is found in the traditionalists who are refusing Vatican II. That's where it's found.
During the interview, Your Excellency, they discussed two heresies, the Protestant heresy and the modernist heresy. And here, Bishop Schneider departs from Vatican II itself, ecumenism, because he says that heresy, and he's referring to the Protestants, is something evil that must be removed from them. Whereas Vatican II says the dialogue, etc., doesn't require that, but some just common ground and just that we work together.
Right. Again, if you look at the literature in the 1960s, the modernist theologians were rejoicing over the fact that there was no theology of return. That's what they called it. See, up to Vatican II, the idea was that you would enter into perhaps some dialogue with Protestants in order to make them return. The church, as a matter of fact, the church often approached non-Catholic sects that had broken away and was very successful in bringing them back. And since Vatican II, for 60 years since Vatican II and ecumenism, no one has come back to the Catholic Church, not a single group. And that is because there was no idea of bringing them back. The idea is to water down all of the dogmatic walls, so to speak, and barriers, and to make one big, happy, modernist, dogmaless church. That is the purpose of it. So, I mean, he just doesn't understand the modernist thought and the theology behind Vatican II. He doesn't understand it. Bishop Schneider does not understand it.
And then he applies the recognize and resist. When seeing that Vatican II has some problems, he says, no, but we have to do this instead of that.
Yeah, so we resist the authority of Christ. Is that what he's calling for? We resist the magisterial authority of the Catholic Church. I mean, the very title, Flee from Heresy, from whom are we fleeing? Our next door neighbor who's a heretic? No, we're fleeing from this evil hierarchy that is feeding us heresy. That's what we're fleeing from. And that very idea manifests the fact that they are wolves and that they are not shepherds. They might be in the clothing of shepherds, but they are wolves because the sheep flee from the wolves. They don't flee from the good shepherd. They flee from the wolves. And if they are wolves, there's no possible way in which they can be endowed with the authority of Christ to rule the church. They are therefore false popes, false bishops.
And Bishop Schneider recognizes that modernism is awful and evil and not compatible with Catholicism. He says it comes from relativism. Nevertheless, again, that the very heresy of modernism is found in the person he claims to be the Pope. So
yes, no, Bergoglio and all of these Vatican II popes have merely packaged modernism as it was condemned by Pius X, and presented it again in different ways, perhaps different language, but it's all the same, and that is ecumenism. That is, there is no objective dogma. There is no dogma to which you must adhere in order to attain eternal salvation. That's the basis of ecumenism, that all of our ideas are relative, and religion is a feeling inside of yourself for God, and it's personal to you, and dogma is merely an instrument, as the moderns said, of belief, and it can change, it does change, it evolves with time. We just saw recently this document from the Vatican that we're now going to question Vatican I, that we have to reevaluate it, and because as Paul VI said, the papacy is the greatest obstacle to ecumenism. So obviously the papacy has to go in the garbage can, and the way you do that, Vatican I is a big obstacle to placing the papacy in the garbage can. So we have to reevaluate Vatican I. I'm waiting for the day when we have to reevaluate Vatican II. So, I mean, if you can reevaluate all of these councils, well, then what is the authority of anything that the modernists are saying?
Yes. And the problem is, Your Excellency, that for Bishop Schneider, Vatican II does have authority. Therefore, even though he will agree that we have to re-evaluate Vatican II, he even says we have to have a new profession of faith that condemns all of the heresies. And then he says that adulterers cannot receive Holy Communion when a document by his own Pope says you can, and they can.
Yes. And so, again, he falls into recognize and resist, which Pius IX said is schism, is the sin of schism. He said it explicitly of some Eastern rites who were calling him the Pope and recognizing him as Pope, etc., but saying that they're going to not observe his rules concerning liturgy. So that's recognize and resist. And he said, it does little good to recognize me as Pope when you don't give me obedience that is due to me. And that was merely on the disciplinary level. Imagine on the doctrinal level what he would have said. He would have said it's heresy to do that. But he declared it schism. He said even before they are declared, it's schism. It means they are in the sin of schism. So recognize and resist is the sin of schism. And it's, so that's like for him to call Viganò schismatic is ridiculous when he put out a book calling for schism according to the condemnation of Pius IX. And he can read it for himself. It's Que in Patriarchatu.
And this is the second part of that interview, Your Excellency. Bishop Schneider says that, yes, Viganò has committed the crime of heresy, and on the one hand, it's unfair or unjust that he has been excommunicated because many heretical bishops are free to do whatever they want. On the other hand, he says it is fair because and deserved because Viganò is promoting sedevacantism. So,
well, those two things don't make sense. And there is, again, if you have a hierarchy that is promoting a false doctrine, then Viganò is right. This is the question. Is Vatican II and its reforms and all the post Vatican II magisterium, does this constitute a continuity of Catholicism or is it a break? That's the fundamental question. And so that is the question. Don't attack Viganò for being schismatic unless you attack his position. His position is that these things are a break from Catholicism, and that's where the debate must be. So someone is schismatic here. In other words, either Viganò is schismatic if Bergoglio and all the Vatican II theology, etc., magisterium, disciplines, if they are in accordance with Catholicism, then Viganò is schismatic. If they are not in accordance with Catholicism, then Bergoglio is schismatic. There is no greater schism than to be a false pope. I mean, that is like the Mount Everest of schism, to be a false pope, and because he's the very principle of unity. So if the principle of unity is opposed to the church, that you could not get any greater schism than that. So somebody is schismatic here. And the solution to the question is whether you have continuity between pre- and post-Vatican II Catholicism. And I think Archbishop Viganò could handle himself very well in proving that there is a lack of continuity between those two things.
Yes, and it's clear, Your Excellency, that Bishop Schneider doesn't want to speak about indefectibility and the fact that the Church as a whole is teaching heresy, if that were to be identified as a church, the no sort of religion. So there is 4 arguments in this interview against Bishop Viganò. The first one is that even in the past, when you had invalid elections, the general acceptance of the church, of the cardinals, the bishops, that will convalidate, and therefore it doesn't matter if there was a defect in the election itself. Bergoglio today has to be considered the Pope because everybody accepts him as such.
Well, again, this is known as ignoratio elenchi. We are not contesting, the thesis anyway, is not contesting the election. And what he says is true. A general acceptance of an election that might be doubtful or one way or the other does convalidate the election. And we're not denying that. We are not denying election, but we're saying there are 3 elements to a pope. One is valid election or a convalidated election, as he says. Second is acceptance, but a valid acceptance with a true intention of promoting the good of the church. And thirdly, the authority that comes from Christ once those first 2 things are posited. The authority to rule the church does not come from the church, it comes from Christ. And so those 3 things must be present in him. The only thing Viganò said is that because of defect of intention in accepting the papacy, he doesn't have the authority. Now, authority is what makes you to be a pope or a president or a king. It is not your election or your inheritance or anything else. That is what we call the material side of any authority. It could be any authority whatsoever. The formal side, what makes you the pope or the king or anything else, is the authority to rule. And so Viganò was perfectly correct in saying he doesn't have the authority, and he is a false pope because he doesn't have the authority. Again, Bishop Schneider misses the whole point. We're not talking about election. We're talking about authority and the intention to rule the church in accordance with the doctrines, rites, and disciplines of the Catholic Church.
And another interesting thing, Your Excellency, is when you do study the universal peaceful acceptance and all of what every single theologian teaches about that, you find out that universal includes the actual Pope-elect. That is, if you prove that he himself hasn't accepted the election,
yes,
you don't have universal peaceful acceptance.
Yes. In other words, if his acceptance is defective because of an evil intention, then even if you had every single Catholic in the whole world saying he's the Pope, then he is not the Pope.
The second argument against Viganò is actually something that is correct on the part of Bishop Schneider. It's the question of personal heresy, and he says that that's an issue that has been discussed by theologians and is a matter of opinion, and even the bull of Paul IV, cum ex apostolatus, is not magisterial. So that's you may say, a correct take.
Yes, I don't think, though, that Archbishop Viganò ever argued from the point, or at least the non-papacy, from the point of Bergoglio's heresy, personal heresy, sin of heresy. I don't think so. He may have attacked them on that, and certainly Bergoglio is a public heretic. There's no doubt about it. He's a public heretic. I think most Novus Ordo conservatives would say, yes, he has pronounced heresy publicly. He has taught heresy. But that was in that last document of Archbishop Viganò. He did not bring that up, as I recall. So but also with regard to cum ex apostolatus, yes, that is something that does not apply in this case. For people who don't know what that is, that was put out by Paul IV in probably the 1550s or 60s. And it said if a heretic is elected the Pope, then his election is invalid, essentially that. And that is a penal law. That means it is a punishment of a crime. And that was taken away by the 1917 Code of Canon Law. And so that doesn't apply anymore. So it cannot be cited against him. But even that, as soon as you get into crime, you need a declaration. So you must be very careful to distinguish sin from crime. And if you don't, you get all mixed up and you say a lot of really stupid things, frankly, because you're just mixing two things that don't go together.
And the third argument or criticism of Archbishop Viganò and sedevacantism in general is that we are exaggerating, Your Excellency, the power of the Pope, that we are saying that every single thing that the Pope does is infallible, and that's incorrect.
That's just downright ridiculous to say that. No, we distinguish very much between solemn statements of popes and what we call their ordinary magisterium, their pontifical magisterium. The point is that it goes more back to Vatican II. The general imposition of doctrines and morals and liturgy and disciplines is all of that in accordance with Catholicism, is pre-Vatican II Catholicism the same as post-Vatican II Catholicism? That is the central question. So it is, for example, if the universal church, so to speak, is using a rite that is impious, you see, that would be contrary to the indefectibility of the church. Indefectibility and infallibility are not the same thing. Indefectibility is actually much broader, that the church cannot that is, the church must remain essentially the same in all of its doctrines, disciplines, and laws, etc. Not that it cannot undergo some accidental changes, but it must remain essentially the same in all of its observances, doctrinal and disciplinary and liturgical. And that is what is the question here. The question is not whether he has promulgated something solemnly or not, and in fact he hasn't. Again, it's off the subject. He doesn't understand the problem. Can we go to our parish church and find Catholicism there? That is the problem, not whether Bergoglio has made a solemn statement or not, or that we're exaggerating the powers of the Pope. That is not the problem. Is the Catholic faith present in the parish churches or in the universities or in the schools, etc.? And if it is, why is there such widespread heresy? Again, I cite Bishop Barron's 70% of Catholics do not believe in the real presence of Christ in the Holy Eucharist. Where did that come from? And Father Desai just gave a wonderful sermon that it came from the new Mass, the way they treat the Blessed Sacrament or the supposed Blessed Sacrament in the new Mass. That's where it came from. So I'm just back to the same point. It's off subject. He doesn't understand what the central problem is. Bishop Schneider does not understand it.
And the fourth, you may say, objection or argument against us is that sedevacantists, Your Excellency, do not trust God. And he uses the example of our Lord in the storm and the disciples getting all worried and waking him up because they couldn't stop the storm, obviously. So only God can intervene and give us the solution to all of the present crisis. But I guess there's nothing else we can do but pray and do penance.
Again, I mean, I would just say that's ridiculous because, yes, the church has gone through some very hard times in its days, persecutions, bad popes, not only immoral popes that occasionally, but and that's usually exaggerated, but popes that made some bad decisions in the Middle Ages, persecutions in all periods of time in certain parts of the world. Yes, it has had trouble. It has never been trouble-free. In that sense, it has been tossed by the waves, but it has never deviated, not ever, from its traditional doctrine. If you read all of the councils and declarations of the popes, it is all absolutely consistent, no matter what their morals were, good or bad, or what their judgment was, good or bad, absolutely consistent all the way up to Vatican II. Then it breaks. And so the question is then not, are we having a hard time? This is a question of the very nature of the Catholic Church and the assistance of the Holy Ghost to the Catholic Church, preserving it from error. The error is being taught by the hierarchy to the Catholic Church, and the evidence is that the people do not believe what they believe their ancestors believed. They don't believe in the same dogmas. And it's 83% think that artificial birth control is perfectly okay. That's a mortal sin. Artificial birth control is a mortal sin, and it is also a perversion. It's a sin of perversion. It is very serious. 83% think it's fine. And almost 50% think that, of Catholics, Novus Ordo Catholics, think that abortion should be legal. I mean, where is this coming from? And when I was growing up, abortion was actually a crime. You could go to jail for abortion. So even the civil law said it was, and you wouldn't even discuss abortion in a Catholic family. It was horrible. Murder, murdering babies, and artificial birth control. It was not even discussed. And those things were illegal in the 20s as well, and various devices and all were all illegal. What I'm saying is that where did this change in the beliefs of people come from? Do these things pop in their own heads? No, they came from the hierarchy, and that is you can't just assign that to a wavy situation in the church or a storm in the church. That is a defection from the church's very nature, and that's why we cannot identify that with the Catholic Church. We have to identify this with modernist thugs who have gotten themselves elected and appointed to positions of authority, but who lack authority to rule the church.
And perhaps, Your Excellency, the most dangerous, you may say, error or even heresy, in which even Bishop Schneider seems to fall, is this idea that all the heresy and confusion, doctrinal confusion that we see today, actually comes from the church as such and from Christ, or for the authority of Christ, but that we have to understand that the Christ doesn't abandon the church when it goes bad. So, and that's it's in itself a heresy taught by Hans Küng, the Protestants, and now embraced by the latest document, the Bishop of Rome, said that the church can go bad, but it's only temporary. Bishop Schneider says it's only for a time, and then Christ will fix things up. But the church can teach error. The church can promote immorality, can do all of those things,
Yes.
but it's never abandoned by Christ, and that's how we have to understand.
Yeah, that's straight out of the pages of the arch heretic Hans Küng. Straight out of the pages, who was never condemned by the Novus Ordo, by the way. And he was the one, I heard him say on television years ago, the assumption of Our Lady is an assumption. He's an arch heretic, and at least he had the gumption to say things clearly, and not like the other modernists like Ratzinger and Rahner, who would say things in verbiage and gobbledygook in such a way that when you finished reading it, you were a heretic just as he was. But he said this very clearly, that the church can err, doctrine, morals, etc. It's just in the end it will come out okay, and not to worry. That's a heresy.
And that's exactly what Bishop Schneider.
Indefectibility is a de fide doctrine of the Catholic Church.
Yes. And again, Bishop Schneider publishing a book, Flee from Heresy. He should flee from this particular ecclesiological heresy.
Yes, and he should flee from Bergoglio and join Viganò. That's what he should do.
Yes.
Bergoglio is the wolf. Viganò is a faithful shepherd.
All right, so this is the end of today's episode. Questions for the Rector. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you.